You've got to be very careful when you hear people speaking in absolutes. Now, I am a really big believer that context matters always. And anyone that's worked with me knows that, because without context, everything is irrelevant. And today I want to sort of go through the different context in training and rehab to sort of keep an eye out for that's going to be super helpful for your training. From a front-facing standpoint, if we're looking at social media and we're looking at short form content, it's capturing people's attention. So you're saying things in absolutes, or you're saying things to get people's attention so that they can look at your content, they can delve into it, and then hopefully build some trust that way, which is awesome. That's really, really cool. But in doing so, sometimes the statements and the things that are said are so inaccurate that it's not even funny. But the reality is it gets your attention. Now, just from a broad standpoint, listening to researchers speak or people that are really further along in their career speak, it's very rare that they speak in absolutes, like very rare that they speak in absolutes. There's context, there's layers of understanding, there's looking at, practical application of things versus science. And when you're looking at research papers, how was it done? What were the groups that were applied to, the duration of the studies? So there's always context around decisions that are made and should be made within health and the fitness space. So there's this weird thing in the fitness space where, don't take this the wrong way, a lot of the less educated people will make really, really bold statements as fact. And that is a really dangerous position to be in, because everything's always changing. And, I hope even from my conversations that I hope in 5 years' time, I backpedal on it and go again and update that information. And anyone that I've ever learned from and continue to learn from, hold that same stance where they're like, this is where we're at now. This is what we believe to be true within the context of what we understand. But that is constantly developing. And if we go a step further than that, so we look at like research. Research is a really cool area to be part of. And they're looking at studies and they're looking at certain groups of people. But you've got to understand, when you're looking at research, it's looking at a small subset of person. There's controls, there's durations of studies, and you want to isolate things down to a very small section. So by doing so, often you do sometimes miss the big section, how it actually works in practice, how you would work with something long time. Now, a practical example of that is if I was looking at, how best to build my bicep, you could look at a study that looked at someone training their bicep in a specific type of way for 6 weeks and it grew it by 2 centimeters. But just because that 6-week training program grew it 2 centimeters, it doesn't make that more effective than another training program that could probably do the same thing in the same time frame. Do you know what I mean? There's always context around how it's done, and there's context around food. So was that person adequately fueled or were they not? What types of fuels? Were they hitting their protein targets? Was it made up of mainly carbohydrate? Was it made of fat? You can see how there's so many layers of nuance around all of this. So the moral of today's podcast is be wary of people that speak in absolutes, because everything is constantly changing, and that's a good thing. We should be changing and we should be adapting our thoughts. It doesn't mean that we need to rework everything every 3 months, but what it means is as new things pop up, or as you learn more, or you see some more context within situations, you start to change your thoughts based on what you see, and then hopefully for the better, update your systems, update your thinking so that your clients can get better results. Now, if we have a look at treatment, for instance. Treatment's a really interesting area. So being a physio, I'm across most of it, but you get this weird clickiness where people will fall into one category of treatment. So someone will be like, I only do exercise, movement is medicine. And then you get someone on the other side of the fence that's like, any manual therapy, any dry needling, any trigger point is just a waste of time. It's terrible. And then you get some people on the other side. It's like, do no harm. Don't do anything. Just sit still and take some anti-inflammatories, even though technically physios aren't allowed to give that advice. But you know what I'm saying here. People fall into groups of things. But when we look at that, the context of that is really, it's people are just leaning into what they know So they're leaning into an area that they know that they think they can get predictable results with. So they just do that. It's confirmation bias 101. And people lean into what they know because they're comfortable doing it. And people they learn from and people they see are getting good results. So they're like, oh, that must be what I need to do. But what I think is a superpower as a practitioner is going, well, who is this person that's in front of me? Are they someone that's more stiff and they need some mobility work? They need to prep and prime mobility so they can do movements better. Are they someone that's really on the hypermobile side of things that they need to learn how to control movement? They need to learn how to not compensate when doing movement so they can do the movements better. Or are they someone that just needs a good combination of both in a really sort of like holistic way where it's like some good warm-ups, some good recovery, some good training? And from the rehab standpoint, when I'm working with someone that is more on the immobile side of things, I'm going to be a little bit heavier on the way that I treat. I might use a few more needles. I might be a bit heavier in terms of prescription of like mobility drills. Whereas someone on the other side of the fence who's really hypermobile, you have to be a little bit cautious of the type of stimulus that you're putting in there. Like someone that is hypermobile is already a little bit unstable. So then by really treating that really, really hard and ungluing all the tension spots they have can actually destabilize them further. So the context around how you treat people and the interventions that you prescribe and that you use in your sessions are really, really important. So I think if I'm looking at like social media or I'm talking to people, if someone says, like from a rehab standpoint, you never dry needle someone. It's just bad. There's no research that says that that's great. And the reality is, I've worked with people for the better part of the last 10 years. I can tell you right now, not every single person responds the same way. Some people really respond, are super responders to treatment. Some people actually get destabilized from treatment. It's a thing. And some people have so much mobility built up in certain areas of their body that even if they did 1,000 kickbacks to try and upregulate their glutes, for instance, if their hips are tight, the glute's not going to be upregulated because the hip is so tight. It's a brick wall at the front. So the context of the person in front of you is always really, really important. So I think being mindful of speaking in absolutes is one of those things, and working with people that speak in absolutes is really dangerous. There's often that argument around if there's an area that's really, really tight, the opposing side is potentially weak, and you just strengthen up the weak point and all of a sudden it balances things out. Now, look, I actually do find merit in that. I think, yeah, cool, that's great. But the reality is, if you think of it, if there's a block at the front of your hip and you can't physically pull your leg past your midline, couldn't you just accelerate that with a little bit of manual therapy and then upregulate it with some exercise? Like logically speaking, that makes sense, right? So just because you might not be confident in treatment, or just because the person that you're working with isn't confident in dry needling, it doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that just might not be their skill set, or they've got confirmation bias based on results that they've done previously in other areas. Do you know what I mean? So I think with training, it's the same, but it's slightly different. From treatment standpoint, we're actually adding in interventions that's helping people move better. So some people are going to need mobility and some people are going to be treatment. So just be wary of that. Now, if we move into like a training context, you've got people that have such a variety of skill set in the gym. Some people are really athletic. They jump, they sprint, they're really mobile, they can change direction. And then you have other people that are opposite. They're like a brick. You change direction and they fall over. There's such a variety of people that we work with in the gym that it's impossible to say that one size fits all. Like it's almost like saying, I've had a bad hip and I've had a hip impingement and I've had pain squatting, so no one squat. Like that's ridiculous. Say it out loud. It's ridiculous saying that. With training, context matters. So if you've got someone that comes into the gym and they're new into the gym, they might not have the skill set to do a squat yet. So yeah, the squat might be bad at that point in time for them because they don't know how to execute it properly. But if you can teach them and you can build up the competency of motor control, if they have any issues I was speaking about before, there's any mobility issues or they need to build stability in certain points, you can build up all those weak points. And that might take 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, who knows, 24. But over time, you can build someone up. so that they have the skill set to be able to execute exercises better. So a lot of the time we find there's a lot of biases when people have had issues with exercises, or people have had issues with certain styles of training, such as, say, someone's jumped into powerlifting prematurely and they've gone, from lifting 100 kilos to trying to lift 200 kilos within a 6-month period. You could probably look at that and go 100% increase is probably a little bit too much too soon. Sure, they've hurt their back. They've had a disc issue, which then every single person they speak to after that, they say, powerlifting's dangerous, powerlifting's bad. But when you look at it, no, the context of the situation is you probably did too much too soon. You probably didn't earn your right to actually do that style of training. So you should have built up or hired a coach that could help you progress in a way that actually suited what you wanted to do long-term, rather than thinking just go hard and get it done and that you're, a hardcore powerlifter, just with 6 months of training. It just doesn't work like that. The context around things is really, really important. So if you have a look at low reps versus high rep training, for someone doing, say, for instance, someone's really into barbell work and they just want to get stronger. Doing sets of 12 to 15 probably isn't that good with someone like that. So if I'm back squatting and I'm doing 12 to 15 reps, I'm going to be out of breath. My body's going to break down from a lack of skill before I actually get to true failure. Like, I'm going to be gassed. I'm going to be struggling to breathe. That's not, that's just a mismatch of, what I've got prescribed for me in a training program versus what I want out of it. But then the opposite is true. If someone's saying, man, I just want to do hypertrophy, and they've been prescribed to do sets of 3, there's a little bit of a mismatch going on there. So the context isn't relevant. And I think, someone that articulates what they want well to their coach, or someone that articulates what they want to get out of training, will have a better understanding of where they sort of want to go long-term with it. And the context around that matters. And, the thing with this is this changes over time. Like, you might come into the gym and you might build yourself up in a way that you started off as a novice and now you're really, really good at training, and you can squat, you can bench, you can deadlift, you can row, you can do pull-ups, you can do overhead presses really, really well. But you might actually then just not enjoy doing a certain type of exercise. Like, you might actually go like, I don't really enjoy squatting. That is actually so okay, because the context of it is I can squat. It's just, I don't want to. And that's so okay. So when we look at exercises, often exercises, and still to this day, it actually kind of baffles me a little bit. People will often say that certain exercises are bad. And the reality is there's no bad exercise. Like, I'm going to tell you right now, there's exercises that you look at and you kind of go, oh, that's a little sketchy. But I suppose you could justify it if it was for a specific reason, like as a surfer, or they're doing something, with a huge rotation basis. Maybe that's relevant to their sport. So we should probably be asking questions about why they're doing it first. But there's no real thing that's bad. Like, someone might not have earned the right to do a certain type of movement. Someone might have gone too hard too soon. Someone might have done wrong rep ranges that aren't linked into what their long-term goals are. But it doesn't mean the modality and the type of effort is bad, or the type of training is bad. It's just the context around it that matters. Now, I know I've said context a lot of times. It's probably like 100 times. We should count this after. But the reality is, I'm so passionate about this because one of the reasons that I got into coaching and then going into rehab was I found with people that you could just get such good results from them by changing the smallest thing. So say, for instance, someone was really weak in a squat. A lot of the time you could just change their position, and all of a sudden, get their pelvis and their rib cage talking a little bit better together. All of a sudden, they're squatting better. So the context of that is that this person may be like, hey, like my squat pattern's really bad. And it's like, well, no, you're in the wrong position. So if we put you in the right position, all of a sudden you feel the right muscle patterns firing, all of a sudden you feel more stable, you can do more weight, you can do more reps, you can do more sets, like it compounds. So you can make such a profound change just by changing some of the small components of training. And then if we look at, rehab and pain management, some people come in and like doing this particular movement just hurts. Like it mustn't be a good movement. It's like, no, it's actually the way that you're doing it that is actually the catalyst for pain, because anything that you do for a long period of time is going to build up tension. So if you've been doing something poorly for a long period of time, all the muscles that are supporting that particular movement pattern are also going to get tight. They're going to get sensitive. They're potentially going to cause pain. So you start to get this flow-on effect. But the context of the situation here is, if you did the exercise better, you probably wouldn't be in pain. But the kicker here is, to get out of pain, you've then got to go, okay, well, how do we reverse engineer this? We've got to take some of the mobility restraints out of it, improve the range of movement and control. We need to add some control stability, and we need to relearn that particular exercise. So, you know, from my standing, I'm like, I think before we go and add anything in, before we start reinventing the wheel around things, what we actually try to do first is understand exactly where we're at, what the problems are, if we need to change anything up in terms of the training style, in terms of your actual movements that you're doing, in terms of the way that we're executing them. And then at that point, once you've got a steady base, that's when you start to add layers into things, because the context of what you're training is trying to get towards is the most important thing ever. So I think some of the best coaches, some of the best practitioners, some of the best researchers out there, they all agree on one thing, that it's constantly evolving and changing, and you should be changing your thought processes as time goes on, year on year. You should be, you know, taking in new information, learning new courses, seeing more people in person or online, however you're doing your business, and updating your skill set as you go, because you don't want to be that person that falls into the category of being like, this is the only way that you do something. This is my system. Anything outside of that system is just a red flag, because the reality is it's a really short-sighted way of doing it. And the person that misses out the most on that is the person that you're working with. It's not you, because at the end of the day, they've come to you for a reason. You've probably come in high regard, but they miss out on the results because you're only giving them part of the picture. And I think from that side of things, I think that's a real shame, because people should get the option to carry on their training or carry on their treatment in a way that's super meaningful and it's going to help them on their journey, which is the most effective way. So that's it for me today. I'll see you guys in the next episode.